Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddy Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
All right, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddy Jones, and we have a good show for you this week. We're going to be covering the NHL draft. We're going to be talking about the Andersen trade. We've also got writer Thomas Harrington on, who does a lot of the coverage on the prospects and the draft as well, to talk about everything. And later on in the show, we also have one of the Ducks' newest members, Alex Dostie. He'll be on later on. We'll ask him a couple questions and talk about his experience going through the draft and how excited he is. So with that, we'll go back a few days earlier in this week. The Ducks made a big move. Eddy, you and I, we talked about this on the show last week. We talked about Andersen getting traded, and we said that if he was going to get moved, it would be for 2 draft picks. And it happened. He got traded for 2 draft picks. And what are your thoughts? Because, obviously a lot of fans were not happy with this move.
I think if, at the time I thought it was a pretty good move. I liked getting a first-round pick, although it's the latest first-round pick you can have. We heard Murray say he wants to get some more picks. He picked up 1 this year, 1 next year. We obviously know now that pick ends up being Sam Steele. I think they're what they wanted to do was to use those picks to trade up. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people were biting on that, and they wanted to get, I think, into about probably the top 15, and it just didn't work out. But I think with the 2 players we got, obviously getting Sam Steele with the pick from there, and then we'll have to find out who they get next year. I think it was a pretty good deal, and we saw Brian Elliott go in the draft too for 2 second-round picks to Calgary, and his resume as of late and his stats are a lot better than Freddie. So I think with that, the return was just where it should be.
Thomas, what did you think? Obviously, like Eddy said, we've got that first-round pick now out of the way. But what were your initial thoughts when Andersen was traded? Did you like the trade, dislike the trade, or kind of in between?
I liked the trade in so much as that we had to make it, and the return we got, I thought was very good. A first-round pick this year, a second-round pick next year, and the Ducks have made some very, very good picks in the second round in recent years. Brandon Montour, Marcus Pettersson, John Gibson. So they know what they're doing in the second round. I think they probably would have tried to get a second-round pick this year, but Toronto obviously wasn't biting, so getting one for next season is a very, very nice asset. In terms of actually trading Andersen, I think he's a great goalie. He worked really well in Anaheim, so I'm sorry to see him go. But with the expansion draft coming up next year, the Ducks had to make a choice. And with Andersen wanting, $4 or $5 million a season, it made sense to trade him and keep Gibson since he's younger and has a much smaller cap hit. Personally, I would love to keep both, but with that expansion draft, you got to make that choice. And I think it was better to make the trade when they did, because there weren't that many teams looking for a goaltender. So now they don't have to sit with both. Pittsburgh's already said next season they will probably be starting with both Matt Murray and Marc-Andre Fleury, and that's a situation the Ducks just didn't want to be in.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Ducks, avoided that situation. They don't have to deal with it. And now it kind of leads us to one fan question, Eddy. Laura asks about the Ducks getting a decent backup goalie and who would they go after. And, that's another thing that Murray needs to work on. We didn't take one in the draft. So what do you think? Who are some players out there that the Ducks, might try to target and bring in as a backup to Gibson?
Well, unless they bring one in a trade, I think there's a couple decent options available in free agency. I'll mention the one that I was talking about earlier. I think Thomas has another one as well. I like Chad Johnson played for Buffalo last year. He's a UFA. Made $1.3 million this year. I think he'll probably get a little bit of a raise around, backup money around like 2.5, kind of what we paid Hudobin when we signed him last time. So, I think he'd be a really good option unless Buffalo decides to take him back. He was, a steady backup there. Took over when Lehner was hurt, and on a really bad Buffalo team, he played really well, and I think he would be a great option to play 20, 30 games for us next year. He shared a bulk of the load in Buffalo, and I think he would be a good option.
And Thomas, who do you think would be a good option for the Ducks?
So there are 2 players I think I would look at. My ideal choice would be James Reimer, but unfortunately he's going to be too expensive. He's probably going to want to try to start somewhere, at least split time. So he'd be my first choice, but again, I don't think it's happening. I also don't think I've heard he didn't get along with Carlisle, so he's not coming to Anaheim, unfortunately. The other player I would look that I think is a possibility is Montoya. Eric Stevens, one of the Ducks beat writers, actually tweeted about him specifically sometime in the last week. I forget exactly when. One of the nice things about Montoya is he's 30, but he's also a relatively cheap goalie. His last contract was just over $1 million. And one of the things that's helped the Ducks be very successful over the last several years is having a very good goalie tandem, but one that does not cost a lot of money. So with Gibson making, what is it, 2.3, with Montoya making just over $1 million, that would save the Ducks a ton of cap room and let them make other moves, make it easier to sign Raquel, Lindholm, and the rest.
Yeah, I agree with you, Thomas. I think it would make sense. That's a good pick too, as well. I don't think the Ducks could go wrong with either one of these, but it's definitely something that they're going to have to try to figure out here. Obviously going forward with Gibson as the man in net, and it kind of goes into this topic of free agency as well for other players. We had another fan ask about this too, Eddie. Adam, he asked about left wings and looking at Ladd and Erickson. He also brought up the Fowler and the JVR trade. Nash as well, which I'm pretty sure that's a no-go for Anaheim based upon one of my contacts in New York that is, she told me what's going on in that situation. But looking at these other players, Ladd, Erickson, JVR, what do you think? Is another need for the Ducks is going to be a left wing, and Murray obviously specifically stated a left shooting one as well. So what are your thoughts, Eddie?
And I think it realistically has to come from a trade. I don't think the Ducks can afford and are willing to pay out the money that some of these free agents are going to want. Obviously, Lucic's name has been thrown around. Erickson is still out there, Andrew Ladd, and I think they're going to command a pretty big pay rise in their salary in free agency and some decent term around 4 to 5 years. And I don't think Murray is prepared to sign any of those guys for that long at that much. So I think it has to come from a trade. Obviously, we talked a lot about JVR before the Freddie trade, and I think it's still an option. You don't see a lot of teams, come back to the well and make a second big trade in such a short time. But it just fits. I think it's definitely still an option to look at. And obviously there were rumors we were talking to Buffalo. Some issues with Evander Kane now, so you never know what goes on in that situation. Montreal was rumored to be in on it too. So I think if we're going to get a left wing from anywhere, I think it has to be in a trade.
And Thomas, what do you think? You think the Ducks go for a trade, or they look for free agency for a left wing?
I think it has to be a trade. If there was a free agent I could pick, it would personally be Louis Eriksson. I've always liked his game. The problem is I've been following his possible potential extension in Buffalo over the last several months. And from what it sounds like, is he wants a 6-year deal, and he's 30 right now. The Ducks don't need another player who's 30 years old and signed to a 6-year deal. That just wouldn't help the team in any way. So scratch him off. Again, Andrew Ladd's another player who's going to want big money, big term. Same with Milan Lucic. So it'd be nice to get one of them, but they just aren't worth it for the way the Ducks are built right now. So I agree that it has to be through a trade. There are a number of teams that still need defensive help. Edmonton needs defensemen desperately, and after the draft, they are even more stocked up at forwards than ever before, which is mind-boggling that happened again. But it actually makes sense this time. So they're very good a possibility. Buffalo has supposedly long coveted Fowler for a number of years. Montreal, it sounds like, also was very interested in him. And then there are a number of other teams that they do need defensive help. Boston, Detroit, Dallas, Arizona. There could be a deal to work out with Fowler, with Dupre, with Stoner, with Bieksa, with one of those teams, just so the Ducks clear a little bit of cap space to make it easier to re-sign Lindholm, Raquel, Peardy, and the rest of the RFAs.
Yeah, the Fowler situation's very interesting. Obviously, the talks heated up the day before the draft, and even in the morning of day one of the draft, and then it kind of died down on the picks and whatnot of trying to make a move for Fowler between Buffalo and Montreal. But the possibility is still out there. There's still some reports that maybe the Ducks in Montreal might be talking about doing something. So that's, still in the wings. I don't doubt that something's going to happen. We know that Fowler and Dupree have been ones that they've taken offers on. Obviously, Fowler being the one that's been, getting more of the interest as of late. But just because nothing happened these last couple of days, Eddie, there's still a possibility that one of the Ducks defensemen get moved.
Yeah, and no, we all expected and kind of hoped that it would happen during the draft. It was kind of stale in the trades that were announced. Obviously, Datsuk's contract got traded. Andrew Shaw was traded, Brian Elliott, but a lot of the names that had been rumored to be traded, especially with the Ducks and Fowler, Dupre, and even Kevin Shattenkirk with the Blues, Ben Bishop, and a couple other names, nothing of that materialized, and those are big trades, and it takes a while to work on them, and I think it would have been nice to see one of them. I saw a tweet earlier saying that Kevin Shattenkirk's agent was actually surprised that he's still a St. Louis Blue after the draft. So I think they're going to take time. But with the Ducks, they really do have to get rid of a left defenseman. I mean, we're hoping and we all expect Lindholm to be back. Theodore should play next year, and then that third spot has to go to either Fowler or Dupre. So I think Fowler definitely would fetch the bigger return. And if you're looking to get that top line left wing, then I think he's ultimately the one who actually would end up going the other way.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's what we're going to have to monitor and see is the defense for the Ducks and who's going to get moved. I mean, that's what all three of us have talked about. It seems like the next, maybe not the very next move, but definitely one that's going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. But let's, shift gears here and go into the draft now. Thomas, you covered it. You always do a great job looking over the prospects and what's going on. What were your initial thoughts on all the draft picks that, the Ducks they kept all their picks. They ended up not making any more trades. And what did you think? Run through the players top to bottom and how you felt the Ducks came out.
So I think overall the Ducks did, they had a good solid draft. It wasn't a great day for them, but they made pretty solid picks with every choice they had. I mean, considering where they were drafting, I wasn't expecting them to get any kind of, oh my God, elite player must be on the Ducks right now. All these players are a number of years away from the NHL. So the first pick they made was Max Jones. I actually had him going in the mid-teens to very early 20s, so I was surprised to see him available. I also thought that if he was still he was my list of players. If he's available, the Ducks will take him, no questions asked. So he fell to us at 24, which I think is a great pick. He's a nasty piece of work. Think Corey Perry, but with less scoring, essentially. He does have some discipline issues. He was suspended for 12 games last year in the playoffs for a blindside hit to the head, so he needs to clean up his act a little bit. But so as long as he can keep that nasty side, but not step over the line, he's going to be a very, very solid player for the Ducks in a couple of years. He's only 18. He's playing for the London Knights. They just won the Memorial Cup. So I mean, Eddie obviously got to see a lot of him last year. So he's going to be there for, I'm assuming, the next 2 years before he turns pro. So he's going to take a bit of time, but that's fine. The Ducks can afford to wait on him. Their second first-round pick, Max Steele, that one was definitely more of a surprise to me and to a lot of people. In the mock drafts and draft reports I was looking over, a few people had him as a very late first-round pick, but most had him in the as a second-round selection. But since the Ducks didn't have a second-round selection, he made a lot of sense to pick with that 30th pick that they had since they liked him so much. He's got blazing fast speed. He's a great passer. He's a good goal scorer as well, but he's definitely going to be known more for his setup ability than anything else. And that combined with the speed, some of those descriptions do remind me a bit of Andy McDonald. That's not to say he is Andy McDonald or would turn into Andy McDonald, but right now descriptions remind me of that, so I'm excited to see what he can do in a few years. He's probably going to take a little longer. Again, he'll be in juniors for the next 2 seasons, and then I expect him to spend at least a year or two in San Diego before he looks to make it to the Ducks lineup. But I'm excited to see what he can bring with it, because one thing that the Ducks kept harping upon was his on-ice vision and his just how smart he was on the ice. So those two things make me really excited for him in the future. So the second round, the Ducks didn't have a pick, unfortunately. I had no doubt they were trying to acquire one, but they weren't able to. So in the third round, they picked defenseman Josh, I think it's pronounced Mahura, but don't quote me on that. He's a solid stay-at-home defenseman who last season didn't play a ton because of a knee injury. He was actually injured in the second game of the season and missed the rest of the regular season. But he returned for the playoffs and played all 17 games for the Red Deer Rebels in the WHL. And by all accounts, looked fantastic. It looked like he missed an entire year of development. So that has me really excited. In his rookie season for Red Deer, the year before, that was actually the year that kind of put him on the board in terms of people noticing him and expecting him to be drafted. I think the injury is what kept him from being possibly even an earlier pick, maybe a late second rounder. So getting him in the third round, I think, is a pretty solid choice for the Ducks. In the fourth round, the Ducks picked up two players. The first is Jack Kopacka. He's a little small, but he's a self-described skill forward who put up 43 points in 67 games in his rookie season in the OHL last year. Pretty good numbers. He's someone who's going to take a couple of years of development in the OHL, and then we'll see where his career goes from there. Their second fourth-round pick was Alex Dostie. He's a 19-year-old, so he actually is potentially going to turn pro sooner than the rest of these draft picks, since he can turn pro as early as a year from now. And then their last pick was Tyler Soy. He's another 19-year-old player. As a seventh rounder, the odds of him actually making it to the NHL, it's not great. And no seventh rounders' odds are great. TSN did actually a list of round by round the odds of a draft pick making it to the NHL. In the seventh round, I think was below 10%. But players from there obviously still do make it to the NHL. And the thing that most excites me about him is his offensive development in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, he scored 28 goals. This last season, he scored 46. So that kind of progression in his offensive game, I think, is why the Ducks took him in the seventh round. And also makes me think that, even though he's a seventh pick, he actually may have a chance of making the Ducks lineup someday.
And, looking at all these picks, the Ducks went mainly with forwards, Eddie. They went with 3 centers and 2 left wings and 1 defenseman. What do you think of that? You think the Ducks kind of restocked up, in the prospect pool in the minor league? Because Murray likes to go for defensemen traditionally, and he only picked 1 in this draft.
Yeah, and Murray was kind of modest about that when he said it in the post-draft comments. He said, forwards just kind of fell to us, but I think that was the plan. I mean, a lot of the draft was front-loaded with defensemen, so they were very very good in the top 15, and then it kind of went down from there. And I think with Max Jones at 24, I mean, you just like Thomas said, you have to take him if he's available there, and I think it was a great pick. And they do have to stock up on forwards, and we talked about that before. Murray even said that they've got to pick up a couple centers. Well, they draft 3. They've got some left wingers, and then you still got to keep your defense prospect pool. And I like them drafting Mahura in the third round. Obviously, he was injured all of last season, so that might have hurt his draft stock a bit. But you've got the potential there for drafting possibly a second rounder in the third round. So we'll have to see how he develops. But I think all in all, it was good work. You get a couple crafty centers in Sam Steele and Alex Dostie, and then you've got a goal scorer in Tyler Soy who has an outside shot at making the NHL. And then obviously with Max Jones, you've got a similar style to Richie. He can put the puck in the back of the net. He's really physical. He plays a nasty game. So I think all in all, it was a pretty good draft from the Ducks. Obviously, they only had the 6 picks, but I think they did well with what they had.
You mentioned Jones and Richie in there. We actually got a fan question about that. We had, I'll give this to Thomas. We had EJ asked about Richie and Jones, and he wants to know which one do you think will have more success with the Ducks organization long term. So, what do you think, Thomas? Richie or Jones? Who do you think will be the more long term benefit for Anaheim?
I guess it depends upon which one of them reaches their potential. Richie, he's more of a scoring power forward. He uses that size to get to the front of the net and put the puck in. He scored a couple of goals in San Diego where he just literally knocked over the fence in front of him to get the goalie and put the puck into a wide open net. So that's what he can bring to Anaheim, if he can actually get to that point in the NHL level. Jones, his game isn't as much finesse, but he also just bowls his way to the front of the net and will knock people over even more physically than Richie will. But again, his game isn't quite as skilled. So it kind of depends upon how they continue to develop, if they can reach their max potential. And if they both do, then there's no question in my mind it's Nick Ritchie, because they play a similar game, but he's going to score more goals. And I think is that potential top line left wing we've been looking for. That's not to say that Max Jones isn't going to be a very good, effective player for us in the future. I think he's someone who, depending upon what the team looks like in 3 or 4 years, could look great on any of the top 3 lines. Like if we still have, if Getzlaf and Perry are still running the Ducks top line, he could fit next to them and just get that his forechecking presence could create some more space for them. It could make people look away from Perry and Getzlaf and focus on him because of how he's just running over hitting everyone. he could run a line next to Kessler because their games are very similar of just being gritty and grinding and in-your-face hockey. And maybe he would even fit next to Raquel because again when he's running over you, people tend to pay less attention to the skilled player on the ice. So he's a player who I think can fit in up and down the lineup. He won't score as much as Nick Ritchie, but he's a player who can definitely create space for his line mates.
Another question about Ritchie, Eddie, that kind of came up to my mind right now is the Ducks are looking for, a left wing, left shot, and they're going out finding one. And if they don't, do you bring up Ritchie and you play him next year, and that's the guy that you're looking for? Or do the Ducks still trade defense, and try and get a winger, and then maybe you keep Ritchie in San Diego or do something else? I mean, what do you think? Because if the Ducks don't get a left wing that they want, it would kind of seem logical to try to bring Ritchie up and give him another run with the team.
Yeah, and I think they're looking at that for sure. And obviously that's definitely an option available to them. Like I said, they're not pressured right now into making a trade, but Murray did say he wants a top left wing. He wants a left wing in the league that shoots left and is if you look at him from any perspective, he's a top left wing in the league, and I think you can't say that about Ritchie yet. He obviously has all the potential to get there, and I think he deserves a shot with the Ducks next year. But if we go off by what Murray said, I think he's looking more for like the guys we mentioned in JVR and Eriksson and Nash and all those other guys we mentioned on last podcast and earlier in this one. I think that's more so what he's looking for. But there's no question about it. Ritchie will get a shot, and if he can take take advantage of that opportunity, there's a good chance he could fit in on that top line left wing this season.
And mentioned giving him a shot again. Obviously, he played last year substantially, and bringing him up. Thomas, what do you think as far as the other players that are currently in San Diego right now? I mean, obviously Theodore's one of them, but and we can talk about him. But is there anybody else that you would kind of expect to play with the Ducks next year? Out of San Diego.
There's a couple of different players I think who have a chance next year. Outside of Shea Theodore and Nick Ritchie. The first is the most obvious one. That's Brandon Montour. His rookie season in San Diego was fantastic. He's come along a long way since he was drafted in the second round a couple of years ago. So he's the first one to watch for. He does need to work on his defensive game, but if the Ducks run a couple of injury issues and they need to bring up someone to play on their bottom pairing, and also to inject a little offense from the blue line, he's the player you bring up. And his offensive potential is even greater than that of Theodore's, which is mind-boggling to say. And 2 years ago, no one thought that possible. But that's just how good he's become in the last years. So he's the very first one. The other few that are possible is on defense. I think Andy Walensky has a very outside chance. He has played NCAA hockey for the last 4 seasons and made his AHL debut last year with the goals at the end of the season. I believe he played at every single playoff game for the Goals, one of the few defensemen who can say that for them. So that means, in my mind, they trust him a lot. So, again, if the Ducks run into injury issues, he's a possibility. Another defenseman to watch out for, and I think this one is much less likely, is Jacob Larson. I expect him to be back in the SHL next season. Because if he doesn't make the Ducks roster, there's a clause in his contract that he can go back to Sweden and play there instead of playing in San Diego. Personally, that's what I expect to happen with him. But if he comes in, has an amazing camp, you never know. Maybe he's got an outside chance of making the team. At forward, after Ritchie, the other two big ones are Stefan Nasa and Nick Kudelis. We've seen Nasa a couple times over the last couple of seasons. Last season, he was finally healthy for the first time in his AHL career. And unfortunately, because of his prior injuries, I think that really hurt him. He didn't have a very good season. So I think this season is kind of it's a prove it, make it or break it season for him. If he can actually start putting up those numbers again that he was doing before all those injuries, I think we will see him in Anaheim for more than one game this time. Nick Kudelis has yet to make his NHL debut, but I wouldn't be surprised if he actually manages to this season. He's a second-round pick from a few years ago. He's a local boy, and he's also just a very good playmaker. He can play on the left wing. He can also play center. So he's one of those jack-of-all-trade players where if you need a player in the lineup that can play multiple positions, he's one of the more likely to be chosen and brought up. Thompson being out until the trade deadline, there are a couple of bottom 6 players in San Diego that have a chance. Not a great one, but a chance. The big one being Joseph Cramarosa. he was great in the goals bottom six last year, and even played a top six role on occasion. So he's a grinder. He's another player who could just fit in on that fourth line next to Garbett, next to Wagner, depending on if the Ducks don't bring a veteran or two in. Like last season they signed Citarelli, they signed Stewart. Both of those players could play on a fourth line and would push Cramarosa out. If the Ducks don't sign someone like that this year, I think there's an excellent chance for him. And then finally, the last forward who I think might have an outside chance is Andre Kase. He's a seventh-round pick from a couple of years ago. He missed most of last season with the goals with injury, but when he was with them, he was actually one of their better scorers. So he's an outside chance, especially since he's a right wing, where the Ducks actually are pretty set on the NHL roster. But again, he's someone who could work on, say, a fourth-line role when the Ducks deal with injury issues.
Well, there you have it. I mean, all the depth that we have down in San Diego is definitely going to help with whatever we don't get in free agency. I mean, we're going to see what happens. The free agency is going to open up here July 1st. And, of course, it's going to get crazy as usual. But the good thing about the Ducks is they have depth down there to bring up players. If we don't get people to fill in, like you mentioned, Thompson being out injured, we'll have to see how this left wing deal plays out as well. With that, let's talk about the draft in general, like as far as surprises and things that happened. I guess the biggest thing that happened in this one, Eddie, was probably Columbus going with Dubois as their third pick. And then Edmonton ends up getting Puljujarvi instead. And that kind of really started the draft on last Friday, getting a little bit of a crazy start there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think all season it was really Matthews, Laine, and Puljujarvi. That was the top three. Dubois has had a steady rise all season. I know Sam Constantino from Sportsnet actually had Dubois ranked third, but he was under the assumption that a team would trade up into third to get Dubois, a team like Vancouver or someone who really needs that center. And it was actually Columbus who just ended up taking him, and we heard a lot of rumblings the night before the draft that, maybe Winnipeg wasn't completely sold on Laine and they were looking at Puljujarvi. Obviously, they ended up drafting Laine, and then the other assumption was that Jarmo Kekalainen, the general manager for Columbus, actually didn't like Puljujarvi that much, and he's a Finnish GM, and I guess that ends up being true. He might be a little bit harsh on the Finnish players, and he ends up taking Pierre-Luc Dubois, and for sure it's a surprise. I think we all agree right now, looking at it, Puljujarvi's the better prospect, but the way Columbus is built, they've got a lot of good wingers in their system coming up, and I know it makes sense, but it's a surprise. I mean, you get a guy who can play center and who wants to play center, and you lost Ryan Johansson. It makes sense to bring in a guy who could be a future number one center in your team. But it's really, really hard to pass up on such a good player. And then obviously, Edmonton doesn't win the draft lottery, but they end up getting lucky in the draft itself, and they draft another possible franchise forward.
What are your thoughts, Thomas, on the craziness that unfolded between Columbus and Edmonton here?
I was shocked. Edmonton, they lose the draft lottery. They don't get that first overall pick finally, and then they still get the third best prospect in the draft. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right, exactly.
What Columbus did is they didn't draft the best player available. They drafted based on a need, which in the draft, that's always a very tricky situation to do because and the Ducks have always taken the mantra of we will take the best player available. I mean, if there's a need in the pipeline like this year with forwards, they might put a focus on forwards in general. But I mean, after trading Johansson, there's no question. The Dragons, they do need a franchise center, and they think they just drafted one. But I still think you should take the best player available. If not, then make a trade. Even if it's just trading the third pick to Edmonton with a fourth pick and like a seventh rounder, at least you're getting something else out of it. But yeah, personally, if somehow we could have known that the Jackets would take Dubois and pass on Puljujarvi, I would have loved to see the Ducks trade for that fourth pick. But obviously, once Puljujarvi was still there, there's no way the Oilers are going to give up on him. Yeah, I was shocked. We've heard all year about how it's Austin Matthews, Patrick Laine, and then Puljujarvi. Some even had him second overall over Laine for a lot of the season. But Laine is great, World Championships, and just his incredible play in the second half of the season made him the second overall, right? So yeah, it was very surprising to see that happen.
And the next surprise came later on. Arizona had the 7th pick, and then they ended up trading Detroit, and they got the 16th pick. And this was kind of interesting, Eddie. I mean, because they ended up taking on Datsuk's contract, but then they got Chichuran, so that was a pick that also had fallen low. Everybody had thought he had gone up higher. What did you think about this trade and the pick? In this one, because it was kind of a surprise. There was a delay on the clock at the time, and everyone was trying to figure out what was going on. And then finally, they had announced that this trade had been made.
Yeah, I think Arizona did very well at the draft. I think being the team that was so far from the salary cap floor, being able to bring in Datsuk's contract, you're not hurt for too long. I believe he's only got 1 or 2 more years left on it. So in the development stage that Arizona's in, they're not going to compete next year. I think they surprised a lot of people with how well they did at the beginning of the season. But they're definitely not going to compete. They brought in Goligoski. They've still got Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Domi, Duclair, Strome should be there soon. Christian Dvorak. They drafted Clayton Keller, which I think was a very good pick for them at number 7. Very skilled forward, and then getting Jacob Chitrin all the way down at 16. Is great for them too, and being able to just move up from 20 to 16 to get him, I think was a great move. I know you have to take on Datsuk's contract, but the fact of the matter is, if any team was going to take it on, Arizona was the most likely team with the low salary cap they have. So, all in all, I think they did a really good thing there. They ended up grabbing 2 players, 2 really good players in the first round, and really helped their development.
And Thomas, what did you think of Dallas and Arizona making this move?
Dallas.
Detroit.
Sorry, Detroit, my bad. Detroit and
No worries, it's early.
Yeah.
I kind of go back and forth on this one. If Chitrin works out, it's a a very, very good deal for Arizona because they got a player they were really heavily targeting. So if he turns into the player they want, I think it's a great deal for them. My issue is they helped Detroit out of a very, very tricky situation. Datsuk's got 1 year left. I believe it's at 7.5 million. They now have the cap space to go for Steven Stamkos. If you're going to take on Datsuk's contract, I feel that they should have asked for more. They got that first round pick, but they also gave up a first round pick. So they only moved up 4 spots in the draft. I just feel that if you're going to take on Detroit's contract, you need to make them hurt a little bit more. You got to take a little more, whether it's more picks, whether it's one of their prospects. You say, I only do this if you give me Anthony Mantha, one of their top prospects. Detroit probably says no, and then they have to eat Datsuk's contract. They can't sign Stamkos. It's just how it goes. So I like what Arizona did in getting that pick because they really like the player, obviously. I don't like how they helped out Detroit without asking for more from them.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. That's the one thing that I kind of had issue with too when Detroit and Arizona made this deal. I felt like Eddie said, I didn't think it was unfair, but I definitely thought Arizona could have got a little bit more out of that. And it kind of goes into now the race for Stamkos, Eddie, because Detroit's made room now to go after him. There's several other teams that can go after Stamkos, and it doesn't look like he's coming back based upon the comments that Yzerman made at the draft. So, what do you think about Detroit and some of these other teams jumping in the race to pick him up?
Yeah, Detroit's definitely in there, and a lot of GMs have cryptically said that they're going to go in and get Stamkos. I think it was Tim Murray said he's going to go after the big fish in free agency, and I think we all know who that's going to be. And Toronto's been in on them all year. Buffalo's creeped their way in. Obviously, Detroit now. There's also the Rangers are in on them too. So there's a fair amount of teams in, all Eastern Conference teams. Obviously, Tampa Bay still has a chance to bring him back, but there's a lot of possibilities for him out there. Buffalo has enough salary cap to bring him in. They've got a young team ready to get going. I think there's a logjam at center if they bring him in, but it's hard to pass up on a guy like Steven Stamkos. Obviously his hometown team in Toronto has been a long time, rumored team for him to go to, and now obviously with Detroit emerging and the Rangers trying to get in the mix, there's a lot of interesting options for him come free agency. And this is one of the biggest stories at this time of year in a long time in the NHL. You don't see a lot of these players ever get to free agency of players of that quality. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see to which team he goes to.
Yeah, and talking about trades, there weren't too many that went on the past couple of days. We saw another one involving Andrew Shaw. He ended up going to Montreal. What did you think about that trade, Thomas?
I see he's a restricted free agent. I think it depends upon what they sign him for. I saw a rumor on Twitter that he's asking for 6 or 7 years. And if that's the case, then I don't like this deal from Montreal. He's a good player, but he's not a player I would invest 7 years in. 4 years, sure. Five, that's probably as high as I'd go. If he really wants 6 or 7, I don't like that kind of term for what he brings. But if they sign him to a reasonable deal, of 4 or 5 years, I think it's a good deal move for them. And after the way last year ended, they need help.
Oh, I agree. I think you're right. I think 3-4 years maybe at the most. 6 or 7's a little bit too crazy on that end. Looking at the draft, was there any other moves, Eddy? There's a couple other trades out there. Anything else that you want to touch on or you were surprised about?
I mean, obviously, we're all surprised with the Jesse Pujara, Pierre-Luc Dubois thing. Brian Elliott being the goalie that ends up going to Calgary was a little bit surprising. I think the Carolina Hurricanes, in my opinion, did really well getting Julien Gauthier at 21. I think that was, he fell from where he was ranked earlier on in the year, and then I think also the Rangers getting Sean Day in the third round. Not many players get granted exceptional status into the OHL, and all the last three that did were taken first overall, and obviously they ended up getting him in the third round as a defenseman from Mississauga. So I think that's definitely one to watch out for there. I think that was, in my opinion, a big surprise because the last three players who've been granted exceptional status, they've all we know Connor McDavid and I believe Sidney Crosby, and I think it's Steven Stamkos. I can't say for sure. I know for sure it's Connor McDavid, and the quality of those players to see a guy that was granted the same thing go so low was a surprise to me.
And Thomas, your final thoughts on the draft?
I think for me, Edmonton had a great draft. I thought Calgary did great. Toronto, I mean, they got Austin Matthews. That alone was a great draft. Winnipeg had a great draft. I'm not entirely sure what Boston was doing. They made a couple of let's call them interesting picks that they could work out. But I mean, when they picked 20th overall, they picked Trent Frederick. Most people had him as a very late second round or even a third round pick. So it was surprising to see him go that early. And then there were a few teams that actually didn't even have a first round pick. The Sharks didn't, the Kings didn't, the Hawks didn't. And I hate to say it, but I think both Chicago and LA made good picks with their first pick of the draft. So Chicago, they got Alexander DeBrincat 39th overall. A lot of people had him as a player who'd go in the mid-20s in the first round. He was one of the players I was looking at as the Ducks to possibly take. He's small, he's 5'7", but he can score. He knows how to score. So I think that's a great pick for them. The Kings, they got I think it's pronounced Kale Clegg. He's a defenseman. They got him 51st overall. He's another player who was probably going to be a late first round pick. So the value of those two got in the second round, I think, was very good for them. Which, being LA and Chicago, I really hate to say it, but, props to them for those two picks. I thought those were very solid first picks for the second round for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Kings and Chicago, like you said, did pretty well. Granted, they didn't have that first round pick, as you talked about. With that, we're pretty much going to wrap up talking about the draft. We are going to have Alex Dostie come on, and we're going to ask him a couple questions, and we're going to go into that right now. All right, with us today, we have a special guest. Alex Dostie was picked up by the Ducks in the draft in the 4th round. And first off, Alex, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. No problem.
Alex, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're only 19. You got drafted by the Ducks, but give a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm from Drummondville, Quebec. So I'm French, so maybe my English will be, sometimes I will do some mistake, but yeah, I'm from Drummondville, Quebec. I live in with my parents, and I have a brother. He's 22, so he's 3 years older than me. And when I was young, I just started playing outside with my brother and their friends and my friends. We're a big hockey town with the Drummondville Vulture, the junior team back home. And yeah, I played like everybody in minor hockey with all the people in Drummondville. I traveled a lot. After I was drafted first round with the Gatineau Olympics in the Quebec Junior Major Hockey League. And after that, it's just after my first season at 16, I had a surgery my shoulder, my left shoulder. So after that, I had my 17 years old year with the team, and a decent season. Was not my best season, so I was ignored in the draft last year. So this year I had a good season, and the Ducks picked me up.
Does it help playing in Gatineau, being from Drummondville and just being so much closer to home that you don't have to end up going to the OHL or to the WHL and being miles and different provinces away from your hometown?
Yeah, of course. It's only like 3 hours of car of road. So
Hmm.
my parents are coming often. They come to see the game. My girlfriend too. So yeah, it really helps.
So you've played the last 3 seasons in Gatineau, and now obviously being drafted for the Ducks. I believe you still have one more year of eligibility left with Gatineau. Do you expect to be there next year, or do you expect to maybe challenge for a spot at training camp?
Yeah. I expect to go back in junior with the Gatineau Olympics because I can't go AHL because I'm only 19 next year,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna be honest. I don't think I'm ready in NHL now, and
Yeah.
I think it's okay. I need to work on different aspects, and I need to work on my strength too in the gym. But yeah, it's junior hockey, so I don't know if I'm gonna go back to Gatineau. 'Cause you never know what happened. But I think they like me there too, so yeah, I expect to go back in Gatineau next year.
So if you go back to Gatineau next year and you get teamed up again with line mate Vitaly Abramov, is he gonna have a little bit of something over top of you, getting drafted in the third round, a little bit above you?
I don't think we're like that. Yeah, he's just a good friend, and he's happy for me. I talked to him on the phone, and he was just he was so happy for me, and same as me. He's a good player. I think we yeah, we're good together, and I hope we have a new coach this year, and I hope he see that and he tries something with him and me.
Yeah, and a lot of your former coaches I've seen, especially former Gatineau coach Benoit Gruel, compared you a lot to Matthew Perreault. I know you're kind of modest about that, and you like to be your own player, but did you model your game after Perreault, him being from the same city and same midget program, or did you model yourself after a different type of player in the NHL?
Yeah, well, of course, I saw him play a lot, Pero, because he's from where I'm from, and I train with him in the summer, and I play with him on the ice with Sean Couturier. So we have pretty good player here, and yeah, like since I'm young, everybody compare me to Matthew Pero, and of course, it's nice to hear because he's a very very good player. But I try to play like me, not compare myself, just be like me. I think every player is different, but yeah, it's a good comparison. I think you guys saw him play with the Ducks,
Yeah.
so you know what's my
Hmm.
style of play.
So we all saw the tweet yesterday when you thanked the Ducks and everything, and we saw. Were you not at the draft yesterday?
Yeah, I was not in Buffalo because I talked with my agent and he told me, we never know in the draft, so
Hmm.
maybe you were going to be drafted in sixth or seventh round. So he said, I suggest you not to come because the development camp are gonna be just 3 days after, so you're gonna receive your shirt.
Hmm.
But we didn't know like the Ducks liked me that much. So if I knew I was about to go fourth round with the Ducks, I'd probably go. But it's okay. I had a good time last night with some family and some friends, and we celebrated. It was pretty cool.
So were you watching it on TV, or like were you pretty relieved to hear your name come up in the fourth round?
Yeah, I was in the on Twitter because I was just always refreshing the page. And I was about to eat breakfast, and I was like, oh, it's only the fourth round, so I have time to eat and everything. And I received a text from my friend who was in the draft, and he just he just texted me good job, and I was just like, what happened? So I refresh my Twitter page, and I saw I was drafted. So I was just so happy, and yeah, it was very fun.
Just one more question for you, Alex, before you go. But before you came on, we had talked about you getting, obviously drafted and being excited. How does it feel? Because you had mentioned, last year at the draft, you thought maybe you had gotten picked up and, it didn't work out. And is there anything you would maybe tell other people? Because, there's other players out there, too, that sometimes
Yeah,
they don't get picked up in the draft and maybe they get down on themselves.
yeah. Well, sometimes for sure, some things that happen. A lot of things can happen in the season. Like me, I was injured in surgery, so that was not my best year. And what can I say? Eh, it's not because your first draft eligibility, you're not going in. You're not get picked up. You're just still working, and I think the major way to go through that is in the summer. I changed my nutrition. I changed my training. I just in my head was I was telling myself, it's not gonna happen again. And I think you need to there's not happening, you need to take that and just learn what you need to do to be better. And I think that's the way you can make it.
Well, you know what, Alex? Thank you for coming on the show. We're really excited that you're part of the organization. I live really close to San Diego, obviously down the street from Anaheim. So I'm hoping to see you maybe in a year in San Diego with the Gulls, and we'll be in contact. Obviously on social media and whatnot. And just appreciate you coming on our show.
Yeah, perfect, no problem.
And again, thanks to Alex for coming on the show and talking about his draft experience. We hope to see him in San Diego and eventually in Anaheim as well. Some other news that came up around in the NHL this week was the expansion news, Eddie, as far as Las Vegas coming in and the expansion draft, which has obviously affected the Ducks with the Andersen deal. There's two protected lists that teams have to choose from, and they can either go with option A, which is 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goaltender, or they can go with option B, which is 8 skaters, a combination of forwards and defensemen, and then 1 goaltender. What are your thoughts on this? For the Ducks, it kind of affects them a little bit with the no movement clauses as well. How do you think the Ducks might look at this and go from either option A or B?
Yeah, and I think it all depends on how their roster looks next season. Obviously, we expect a lot of turnover and change to still occur. Obviously, either Fowler or Dupre has to go, and I think that's a big determination of which one they go with. I think if Fowler's still here, then you've got 4 defensemen that you want to protect and 1 you have to protect. So you would have Lindholm, Vatanen, Fowler, and Manson. You would want to protect, and then you've got BX as well, who you have to protect. And it's a tough one. I still think Fowler ends up getting traded, so then you've only got to choose between Fowler, or sorry, between Lindholm, Vatanen, and Manson, and then whatever you end up doing with BX. But then you've got the forwards too. You've got Kessler, Perry, and Getzlaf are already automatically there. Then you've either you want to choose between Silfverberg and Raquel and Cogliano, and there's your 6 forwards right there. And if they end up trading Fowler for a top left wing, you've got 7. So in the end, I think realistically they go with option A and 7 forwards and 3 defensemen, but it really all depends on what their roster looks like come next year.
Thomas, what do you think? If the Ducks go with option A or B?
So like I said, it depends upon who's for the team. If we trade Cam Fowler for, I don't know, Taylor Hall or someone, then you want to protect that new player you're bringing in. If you sign a high-end free agent, you probably want to protect that player unless they absolutely bomb while they're here. And I like option A better just because you're protecting more of your team. But because the Ducks' strength is in their defense, option B actually does look kind of nice. Thankfully, a lot of the Ducks' young talent, Nick Ritchie, Shea Theodore, they should be fine since all first and second professionals will not count towards it. So that's great. The Ducks' future should still be fine. That does mean that a player like Stefan Nason does not count, so he could be taken. Because I do know that the Las Vegas team, they have to take 30 players. So that means some players they will be choosing will be for their minor league system. However, that ends up working out for them. So that's another option. They could take someone from the Gulls instead of the Ducks. As for the 10 versus 8, and the thing that throws the hitch into the plan is Kevin Bieksa, because he has no movement clause, so he has to be protected. And then after him, if all the defense, if the entire defense is still here, you'd want to protect Vatanen, Fowler, Lindholm, Manson. At least those four. Bieksa makes 5. That's simply too much. If we trade one, then we still have 4 players, but that still is the leaving an option B of the 8 skaters instead of 7 forwards and 3 defensemen. What would be nice is if Bob Murray has to talk with Bieksa and says, you've got no movement clause, but you can waive it so you are eligible to be selected in the expansion draft. We can almost guarantee they're not going to choose Bieksa. That will allow the Ducks to protect 3 of their young defensemen and still protect 7 forwards. And Murray could even say, if you don't do this, I will buy you out instead. So I'm kind of hoping they have that conversation saying, waive this, or, we simply can't have that no movement clause during the expansion draft process getting in the way of protecting our other young defensemen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's exactly what should go down. I mean, if the Ducks are going to move a defenseman, obviously Fowler's the one that's been talked about the most. But I mean, if they're going to move him, you've got to keep Vatanen and Lindholm. I mean, of course, the Ducks got to re-sign Lindholm as well. But both of them you need to keep. You got to take Manson with it as well. So there's your 3. And then you're stuck with Bieksa and the no movement clause. And I think Thomas makes a good point there, Eddie, is if you can waive the no movement clause, which you do with Bieksa, that's something you go for, because you got to protect these other younger guys as opposed to Bieksa. He's lower on the totem pole.
Yeah, and realistically too, he would still stay with the Ducks after that. I think a team would be more interested in, say, taking a younger guy like Simon Dupré instead of Bieksa. So he may waive that, and then with the team only be able to pick one player from the Ducks, they either go for one of our forwards that we don't protect, or they go for Dupré. And I think it's a good option and even if he does say no, and you can always use a buyout or a trade or something. So I think that's the realistic option. Like you both said, we have to protect Lindholm, Vatanen, and most likely Manson as our 3 guys that we protect. And I think Kevin, I think he would waive it. I think in that circumstances, if he believes he could stay, or if he's not opposed to going to Vegas. So we'll have to wait and see. And it's going to be the topic of next offseason, that's for sure.
Definitely, and like Thomas, we talked about the numbers. 10 forwards and defensemen in option A, combined 7 and 3 there, and then in B you've got the option of only 8 total. So I mean, you really want to try and protect those players, especially if the Ducks make a trade and they get in a left wing that they like. Both of you guys mentioned the other players as well. Raquel, we bring him back. You have Silverberg, you have Cogs. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So this expansion draft definitely, puts a damper kind of, I think, in what's been going on in the draft a little bit, Thomas. We didn't see a lot of moves. I think a lot of the GMs are trying to figure out, it's not just the needs of what the team has, but they also got to figure out, okay, who am I going to get and be able to keep and not necessarily, try and make a trade or sign someone just to lose them in a season.
Yeah, it definitely does make it a little more difficult for teams moving forward, because, hey, there's this great player that's available, but if we pick him up, then we're going to lose this other great young player we already have on our roster. So it's going to, I think one of 2 things are going to happen. There's either going to be almost no trading in the next year, or there's going to be a ton of trading as teams try and figure out who they're keeping versus who they can get rid of. They have a team like the Ducks with so much defensive depth, both on their roster and in their prospect system, says, we can afford to lose one of these players, but we don't want to lose, Cam Fowler for free. We want to trade him. So we get something back. But then there's another team say, we don't really want to take him back and give something up for him, because sure, we need the help, but we also want to keep what we have and protect what we have. So I think it could make either a ton of trades happen, or just make GMs very, very cautious. Since this is the first time there's been expansion in the salary cap era, I think most GMs are going to be a little more timid. But there always are a few GMs that, get out there and make a lot of moves in the offseason, Bob Murray being one of them. So it wouldn't shock me to see a bunch of moves in the next year, but also wouldn't shock me if teams just said, we're going to sit with what we have and just see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I agree. Like you said, the salary cap era, it's going to be an interesting year in the NHL. Come, obviously this free agency here in July, then come the trade deadline in the middle of the season as well. I agree with you. It could go either way. You may see a whole bunch of movement, or you may not see too much at all. Around the league, the only other news that we do have coming up here is the Hall of Fame, and we've got 6 players on this list. You've got Eric Lindros, Paul Kariya, Dave Anderchuk, Curtis Joseph, Mark Recchi, and Jeremy Roenick. So we've got 6 that are going to go in. And what are your thoughts, Eddie? I mean, obviously Paul Kariya, we know we want him in there, but what do you think about these 6 players and their chances of making the Hall of Fame?
I think they all have a pretty good chance. Obviously, the class gets revealed on Monday, but I think Eric Lindros, I think he's a consensus pick right now. He's been passed on already. A lot of people think he should already be in there, and with no elite for sure lock this year, I think there's a good chance he gets in. Obviously, Dave Anderchuk too, with his career with the Tampa Bay Lightning and everything he's done. And I think there's definitely a shot for him. I mean, all of these guys deserve it, yes. Are all of them going to get in? I don't know. I mean, Curtis Joseph had a great career, had a couple great seasons. Obviously, played with Toronto, and I mean, all over the place. Really, he was with many different teams over his career. I mean, Paul Kariya. We all know Paul Kariya and what he's done for the Anaheim Ducks. Obviously, his career derailed a lot by concussion. Still ended up being a point per game player, just 11 games shy of 1,000. Is 11 points shy of 1,000 too, and he never won a Stanley Cup. So that does hurt him a little bit. But I mean, we would all love to, for sure, to love to have a Ducks player in the Hall of Fame. You got Mark Recchi too. Played a 1,600 game, over 1,600 games in NHL, almost a point per game player. You would expect a lot of those guys to get into the Hall of Fame. He's won individual awards. His statistics are good. They seem to be Hall of Fame worthy. So, I mean, he's definitely a guy you would expect. And then, I mean, Jeremy Roenick too. I mean, he's been a character for his whole career, and he's been a character now with, I believe he's with NHL Network or NBC in the States, and he's a character there too. So, I mean, he's won a lot of major awards. He scored a lot of goals in his career. Never won a Stanley Cup either, but no, I don't think that's going to hurt him for too much. I think he still has a chance of getting in for sure.
And Thomas, what are your thoughts on these players?
I mean, since there are no slam dunk first ballot Hall of Famers who retired 3 years ago, and they're obviously going back to the well in terms of players who have been passed over, and all 6 have an argument for, all 6 have an argument against. Of this list, I think Mark Recchi, Dave Vanderchuk, and Eric Lindros are the 3 I would pick. And they don't have to choose 4 players for the Hall of Fame review. They can choose less. They have done that in the past. And Eric Lindros, he was arguably one of the best, if not the best player in the NHL in the mid to late 90s. But injuries cut his career so short. He never won a cup. But, I mean, he was so good. And we've seen other players put up similar numbers in a short amount of time, make it to the Hall of Fame. Pavel Bure, Cam Neely, Peter Forsberg. So I think he has a very, very good chance. But, it's hard with a player who played less than 800 career games and never won a cup. Andrechuk, I always really liked him. He's the NHL all-time leader in power play goals. He won a Stanley Cup back in 2004 with Tampa Bay in what was a pretty amazing moment to watch. But the problem for him is he played for 23 seasons. So one of the reasons why he's so far off the scoring chart is simply because he stuck around for so long in the league. He was never that elite, 50, 60 goal scorer, but he did score 50 one time and had 42 others, but he was never like the best player in the league at any given time. Still, I think because of his longevity, personally, I think that should help his argument to be in the Hall of Fame. And that combined with, that Stanley Cup in 2004, his power play goals, I think he should be in there personally. Cujo, he's 4th all time in wins, which frankly makes it astounding. He hasn't been elected into the Hall of Fame yet. But he never won a cup. He never reached the final. And his numbers, the wins are amazing, but a lot of people look at him and say, he was just always on very, very good teams, which is why he won so many games. So he's a really tough call. If he makes it in, I think it'd be fine. But if he doesn't, I don't think I'm going to lose any sleep over it. Paul Kariya is a really hard one for me because, he was exactly point per game, 989 points, 989 games. We know how great he was with the Ducks in the 90s. But, post-2000, he was never the same player. He had concussion issues. And in his last season with the Ducks 03, I think he scored 25 goals. Which, that's certainly not a bad season, but for his career production, that's certainly lower. And after he left Anaheim, he had a couple nice years in Nashville and St. Louis. He was just never that same player he once was. He never had much postseason success other than reaching the final in 03. So he's one I could easily see going either way on. Without any, elite first-time candidates who are definitely going in, I think this is probably one of the best years Kariya's going to have to make it into the Hall of Fame. But again, because they don't have to choose the full four, maybe they just choose fewer and don't pick him. I'm not sure. I don't know how Mark Recchi's not in the Hall of Fame yet, frankly. Fourth all times in games played, 12th in points, 20th in goals, 15th in assists. He was around forever. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He should be picked this time, frankly. There's no question in my mind. Roenick's one of the best American-born players of all time. Personally, I find him kind of annoying, but whatever. That doesn't come into play in terms of Hall of Fame selection. I think, he's a 500 goal scorer. He's put up over 1,300 points and is one of the best Americans of all time. I think it'd be hard to keep him out, especially, with this year with there not being a lot of choices. So if I had to pick, it would be Recchi, it would be Lindros as my two for sure. And then after that, I'd say probably Andrew Trick and Roenick personally.
Yeah, that actually what you went with is what I would go with too. I really think Lindros and Recchi will definitely get in there for sure. It's unfortunate. I want Kariya to get in there, but I think that's going to be a tough sell. We're going to just have to see what happens when they announce it coming up this week. But those are the 6 ones that they have listed on NHL.com that could be brought in. You can see the article on the website. It's one of the top articles there on the first page of the website, so check it out. And with that, we're going to wrap up the show. We'll probably be back next week. Depends on what happens come this Friday and Saturday with the free agency starting. There'll probably be a lot of movement and a lot of things to talk about. We'll see how it affects the Ducks, and we'll obviously come back and talk about it and give you our thoughts. Thanks for listening, and let's go Ducks.